This video contains spoilers. Zelda shouldn't exist. No, seriously, by all accounts, Zelda and the royal family should not exist. Why do I say this? Well, while you play Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, you'll come across these things called, tears. And each tear contains one of the time-traveling Zelda's memories from the past. And the one that stands out the most is one of the ones you find pretty early on in the game. After waking up in the past and getting acquainted with Rauru and Sonia, who are the current king and queen of Hyrule, it is heavily implied that Rauru and Sonia are the ancestors of Zelda and thus the progenitors of Hyrule's royal lineage, which means that yes, Zelda is actually part goat. And Sonia even goes as far as to say that she senses a blood connection between the two. I don't think it could get clearer than that. The devs are basically screaming at us that they are family. But that's impossible. For Rauru and Sonia to be the progenitors of the royal house, they would have needed to have had at least one child. But throughout all of the memories that we are provided, there isn't even a mention, not a hint, that Sonia is either expecting or that they've already had a child. So how could this be? And Sonia gets her back blown out by Ganon. Sonia gets attacked by Ganon and it's heavily implied that she dies from this attack, so an heir should no longer be possible. So how is Zelda even alive today to do all this time travel confusing nonsense? Well, I've been browsing the internet looking for answers and I found a few interesting theories that I would like to share. The first theory being that Sonia actually had a sibling and that sibling took over the royal house after her and her husband died. This would explain why Sonia would sense a blood connection with Zelda, because she'd be Zelda's great aunt or something like that. However, this theory does have a few holes, one of them being found in the exact same memory that I referred to earlier. In that memory, it is stated that Zelda possesses both the light powers and time powers of Rauru and Sonia. If this theory is to be believed, then at most, Zelda would only have Sonia's time powers and not Rauru's light powers, because there'd be no relation between them. And even that is stretching it out, because just because Sonia and her siblings have the same blood doesn't mean they'd have the same ability. A second theory is that Rauru and Sonia did indeed have a child, but they just kept it secret because they felt a great threat approaching and that they didn't want their child to get mixed up in it. This would be highly plausible because Rauru and Sonia seem to have a sixth sense for evil and malice, so they probably foresaw a threat like Ganon approaching and they didn't want their baby to be exposed to it. But at the same time, there's a lot of holes in this one too, because how would they realistically hide a pregnancy? They are the first king and queen of a newly established kingdom. All eyes would be on them and everyone would be awaiting an heir. So if Rauru or Sonia showed any sign that a child was on the way, it would spread everywhere. So I'm a bit confused on how they would possibly hide it, but it's definitely more plausible than the early one. Why would the devs hide this though? Why would they gloss over this mystery child, as it would have been an excellent addition to the story? We would have finally gotten to see a hybrid between a Zonai and a Hylian, and they were already going for the whole family-oriented story, so why would they just stop at Rauru and Sonia? Why wouldn't they add a third? The third and final theory, which is actually the one that I resonate with the most, the one that I find the most likely. The premise of this theory is that Sonia was pregnant from the very beginning. From the very first memory that we see, she was already with child. And when she was attacked by Ganon, both her and the baby somehow managed to survive. Although it is heavily implied that she dies, it is not confirmed and no one ever speaks of her after the event. Just ignore that grave over there. It doesn't mean anything. We didn't see the corpse. She could still be alive. Rauru was just acting. He's an excellent actor. That's it. She definitely didn't die. So it's highly possible that she woke up after the sealing and raised Rauru and her child to take over the throne before passing away herself. And the child would inherit the throne and then start the royal lineage. That would also explain why the developers wouldn't talk about a child between Rauru and Sonia, because there was none at the time. It just simply didn't exist. The ancient hero is actually the answer to some of Zelda's greatest questions. Why do I think this? Well, in the last video, I talked about how Zelda and the royal family shouldn't exist due to Rauru and Sonia not having a child. Well, as far as we knew, I delved into some theories trying to explain and fill this plot hole, and I also asked you, the viewers, to comment your own theories down below. And oh boy, you guys did deliver. But there was one theory that stood out to me, and this theory was from Silky49853, and this theory absolutely blew my mind. This theory was that the ancient hero is actually the offspring of Rauru and Sonia, the mystery child that we've all been searching for. Hold up, I know it may seem like a stretch, but hear me out. We already know that throughout all of the memories we gain access to in Tears of the Kingdom, we don't see nor hear anything about a royal child, and the ancient hero is there to fight the first calamity, which would have definitely happened a few years or even a few decades after the sealing of Ganon. The time gap between Ganon's sealing and the first calamity would provide the hero enough time to grow into an adult and become proficient in whatever abilities a hybrid of a Zonai and a Hylian would have, and even mastering the Master Sword before the first calamity. I know what you may be thinking, how could Sonia and Rauru possibly hide a baby? Surely someone would notice if Sonia went missing for 9 months, and to that I say, you fail to consider 2 factors. One of my commenters, Zentralis, points these 2 factors out, and those are race and magic. First off, we're going under the assumption that Hylians are just humans with pointy ears, and thus pregnancy times would be the same or similar to that of a human. But that's a mistake, as this information to my knowledge has never been confirmed. But let's say that is how it works, and that Hylians are just like humans. Zonai are a completely different species, and that would definitely impact on the hybrid's development growth speed. But let's say that doesn't impact it at all. You'd still be forgetting one important thing, and that's magic, and who the mother of this child would be in this scenario, and that's Sonia. Sonia, whose magic literally allows her to control time, and we've all seen how powerful time magic is in the Zelda series. Time powers literally have the ability to rewind objects to a former state or send an object thousands of years into the past. It wouldn't be a stretch to say that Sonia could speed up her own pregnancy from months to weeks to even days, depending on how strong she is at time magic. So it wouldn't really arouse any suspicion, because she could have just been off for like a week and had the baby and made an excuse that she was sick or something, and no one would be the wiser. This theory could also potentially answer many questions, like why are there shrines of light already built before Rauru truly understood how much of a threat Ganon was, as these shrines of light were meant to train and strengthen a chosen hero. Rauru must have built these shrines in order to strengthen his child for the trials that lay ahead, not knowing how vital they would be in the future. A second is the royal line issue. As we see in the tapestries of Breath of the Wild, the ancient hero is fighting alongside a woman who possesses powers very similar to that of his father's. After defeating the first calamity, these two would most likely get married and start the royal family in earnest. After all, if this theory is to be believed, the ancient hero would be the new king of the land, and the princess would now be the new queen. Need more proof? Well, look no further than the ancient hero's aspect, which is an armor set that Link obtains after completing every shrine in the game, which literally turns him into the ancient hero, who possessed both Hylian and Zonai aspects, like his face, his body markings, and the clothes, and the ears that look too short to be a Zonai's but too long to be a Hylian's. But I'm not gonna act as if this is the perfect theory, because for as many questions as it answers, it brings up its own. Like, if every version of a hero is supposed to be a variation of Link, then why is the ancient hero so drastically different? Why is he the odd one out? Why doesn't he look like all the other versions of Links that we've seen throughout all the games? And why does he have red hair when neither of his parents do? Is it some kind of recessive gene that only pops up every few generations? We will probably never know. Dragons are tragic. They are not creatures you should admire, nor creatures you should aspire to be. What they are victims, prisoners trapped within their own decaying minds, forever doomed to wander the skies of Hyrule in bodies completely alien to them. Those who have committed one of the greatest taboos and will now spend the rest of eternity paying for this one action. Tears of the Kingdom revealed many things to us, some major, some minor, but by far the biggest reveal was the origins of the dragon. In order to restore the Master Sword and supply with sacred power, Princess Zelda did something heinous, something drastic. She swallowed her sacred stone and became a dragon for hundreds of years. And although eventually turned back, it still doesn't take away from the fact that the very action of swallowing a sacred stone has doomed countless others to a mindless existence. Sonia herself states that swallowing a sacred stone is paramount to throwing yourself away, as your mind loses all sense of awareness. You are no longer yourself, you just are. And this transformation is permanent. Although in Zelda's case, it was reversible, but what about all the others? The fire dragon, the Thunder Dragon, the Ice Dragons, all the other people that have swallowed the sacred stone but weren't fortunate to have the plot on their side. Beings who used to be people at a certain period in time but are now forever doomed to be husks of their former selves, forever doomed to fly around the skies of Hyrule. And it gets even more tragic because I highly believe that these dragons were benevolent people before they were turned. Why do I say this? Well, in the final battle, Ganon also swallows his sacred stone, but unlike the other dragons, he doesn't start wandering the skies. No, he immediately starts attacking any living thing he sees. In this case, it's Link and Dragon Zelda, and it generally just seems more vicious than the other dragons, as if his malicious nature has been able to stay intact although he's lost his mind in his dragon's form. Which tells me that although mindless, dragons do retain characteristics from their former selves, whether that be appearance, temperament, or even powers. This would explain why Dragon Zelda helps Link fight Ganon, because a part of her still remembers her mission. And this is why I think the dragons we see were actually kind people before they were turned, because their behavior shows absolutely no malice. They don't attack anything. They are not dangerous. The only way they can be dangerous is if you get too close, and that's not due to them attacking you, that's just due to the byproduct of their powers. This brings me to my next point. I believe that the wild dragons were actually heroes or champions. We know that the Zonai only give sacred stones to worthy people, such as champions of their species or people with exceptional abilities, which would make sense as each dragon seems to have dominion over a specific element. They were most likely champions of either the Zonai or a species that lived around the Zonai's time, which only serves to make this theory even more tragic, as they are good and worthy souls that are being subjected to such torment due to either ignorance, trickery, or outright desperation. They are now forced to live out this fate. This theory really bothers me because it just hits so close to home in reality. What I mean is, if you watch the dragons long enough, you realize that they are in an eternal cycle of rising, wandering, and descending over and over again. Much like us. I mean, most of us realize that we're stuck in a cycle. Whether that is wake up, go to school or work, come back, go to sleep, and do it all over again. Over and over and over and over and over again. And no matter how hard we try, it will be difficult for us to break this cycle. But at least for us, there's a chance. But these dragons, they have no chance. They are forever stuck this way, and the plot will not save them. So the next time you see a dragon while playing either Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, don't look at them with awe and wonder, but rather with pity and sadness. For being a dragon is a fate far worse than death. Hey you, yes you, get over here, because I've got a crazy theory that you absolutely need to hear, and it's gonna change the way you see Rauru and the Zonai forever, and it all has to do with the sacred stones, the shrines, and a very sinister power you never knew Rauru had. From the very beginning of Tears of the Kingdom, something has always bothered me, and that's the shrine abilities Link gains access to at the start of the game: Ultra Hand, Fuse, Ascend, and especially Recall. Heck, where did all the other powers come from? And unlike Breath of the Wild, these abilities can't simply be explained by, oh, it's technology, don't look too much into it. Sure, the Zonai were very technologically advanced, but these powers are clearly of a spiritual or magical nature. And this all points back to Rauru. Now this is where my theory gets crazy, because I highly believe that Rauru not only has the ability to absorb, but to store the powers of others, and it all has to do with the sacred stones. Now hear me out, because this power was showcased in 3 separate instances, 2 by Rauru himself and 1 by Link. The first being when Ganon first attacked. Sonia and Zelda channeled their powers into their sacred stones, and Rauru was able to absorb their power to amplify his light, and as we saw, the effects were quite devastating. The second being when Rauru seals Ganon. If you look carefully, you'll realize that Rauru isn't using his power of light to suppress Ganon's darkness, but rather absorbing Ganon's power and converting it into his own, essentially using Ganon's own power to fuel his sealing. And the third instance is seen when the champions transfer their energies using their sacred stones to Link via Rauru's hands, which allows him to use their abilities in battle. So what do these 3 examples have in common? Rauru, a sacred stone, plus someone else's power, and that's why I believe all the runes that we gain access to belong to other people, They were people who volunteered fractions of their powers to Rauru to absorb and store in shrines in order to prepare for a calamity or to help a chosen hero progress. So what's the problem, I hear you asking? He absorbed people's powers, but it was all for a good cause, right? Wrong. Just because Rauru used his powers for the greater good doesn't take away from the implications of this power, and it sheds a dark light on the Zonai as a whole, as it all makes sense now. We know that the Zonai were a very intelligent species, so advanced in fact that people considered them gods. So why would such an intelligent species give the immense walls of power that are the sacred stones to beings outside of their own race? Stones, mind you, that depending on the user could grant them enough power to overthrow or even destroy their civilizations, because there was a contingency plan and also something to gain. My theory is that there was an ability that was passed down for the Zonai that allowed them to steal the abilities of anyone who possessed the sacred stone. So if someone they gave a sacred stone did go rogue or decide to use their powers for evil, they would be able to retrieve the sacred stone and gain their abilities as some kind of compensation. And I know what you're thinking. Don't the champions have to, give consent before their powers can be taken or absorbed? And if that isn't how it works, then how come Rauru didn't use this ability against Ganon? It would have saved them so much trouble. And to that I say, remember, Link is only borrowing Raru's power. Sure, he can become very proficient in it, but he will never truly master it, not the way that Rauru could have. And remember, Link is not a Zonai, so he wouldn't know this technique, thus him requiring permission from the user in order to absorb their abilities. But that doesn't mean that Rauru ever needed to. He just did it because he was polite. And secondly, this technique wouldn't be perfect. It would most likely have some restrictions, like you can't hold more than 10 or 12 powers at a time, like the Mandarin. You may be able to discard or store abilities on the side and then gain new abilities, but you couldn't exceed a certain limit. And you can't absorb a power that is far greater than your own. You can only seal or drain it. Heck, I'm starting to think that the only reason why Rauru was able to seal Ganon is because he had a sacred stone, which allowed the technique to work in at least a certain capacity. Overall, this theory sheds a rather dark light on Rauru and the rest of the Zonai. Maybe they weren't such a great and benevolent race, and maybe that's why there were so few of them by the time Rauru came into power. Only time will tell. While traveling through the depths, you'll find all manner of things, from killer trees to eldritch beings beyond your imagining. But throughout this bleak landscape, two things remain consistent. One, darkness, and the second, and most important of all, gloom. A repugnant substance that seems to suck the very life force out of anything it comes into contact with. A substance that has infected every part of this land, from the wildlife to the very beings occupying it. And we all know who is responsible. Ganon. And you may be asking yourself this, how did Ganon do it? Wasn't he sealed away for thousands of years? And there's no way he could have covered the entire depths, which is just as big as the entire kingdom of Hyrule in such a short period of time. And to that, I think I may have an answer. In the story, Rauru uses all of his remaining power to seal away Ganon, but what you may not realize is that the sealing was not perfect. How do I know this? Well, the calamities. The calamities are living proof of this, as they are masses of Ganon's diluted power, meaning that somehow, some way, even though he was immobile, Ganon's power was leaking out of him. And we know that this wasn't a short-term occurrence, as it is highly likely that the calamity has happened on 3 separate occasions. The first being before the creation of the divine beast, the second being at their creation, and the third one being 100 years before the events of Breath of the Wild. Which means that Ganon's power has been leaking out of him pretty much the entire time he's been sealed. You may be asking, how did Ganon infect the depths with his gloom if most of it was coming together to form calamities? And to that, I have to say this. First, remember where Ganon was sealed. It was a cave system deep underground, which means that it's highly likely that the sealed Ganon would be located equidistant between the surface and the depths. So my theory is that some of his power would make their way up to the surface and become calamities, and the other portion would go down to the depths and become gloom and start infecting the land and creating all manner of creatures. And this would definitely explain how Ganon was able to cover the entire depths using his gloom. It wasn't an instantaneous thing like how the opening cutscene would have you believe, but something that has been happening gradually over thousands of years as his power leaked more and more and the seal became weaker. Which brings into question, How did the depths look like before Ganon's infection? While you travel through the depths in Tears of the Kingdom, you'll find that it's quite barren, with the very few plant life you see looking very pale as if the life has been drained from them, which it most likely has, or being completely covered in gloom and trying to kill you. And the very soil of this land looking grey, worn out and infertile, incapable of supporting any kind of plant life, and the only signs of previous life being the constructs overseeing the abandoned mines left behind by the long extinct creators, and the random skeletons that you will find across your journey signifying a previous species, as well as the Wagner statues, supposed deities meant to help guide lost spirits that you find across this land to the afterlife. And with all of this, I theorize that if you were to walk in the depths before the time of Ganon, you would find a breathtaking world of bioluminescent plants who, much like the light roots, would have provided a comforting light staving off the darkness. A world rich in ores and minerals like Zonai, amber, and even diamonds. A world where all the souls that had went astray could be guided back to the path of the afterlife, and untold creatures could have thrived. This only goes to highlight the evil that is Ganon, for not only has he taken countless lives, but he may have also robbed the world of Hyrule of such a wondrous place, and instead given it an icy and worthless purgatory. And that is an unforgivable sin. Has the curse of Demise been broken? That's the question that's been plaguing me for the past 2 days. But who is Demise, and what is this curse I'm talking about? Well, let me explain. For those of you who are unaware, Demise was the original Demon King and antagonist of the Zelda series, the Ganon before Ganon, if you will. A being so powerful, in fact, that just one of his actions is single-handedly responsible for creating every single Zelda game you play. What was this action? Well, it was a curse. After being defeated by the Link of Skyward Sword, Demise, using the last of his strength, cursed Link and Zelda to an infinite cycle of death and rebirth. So long as there is a princess carrying the blood of the goddess, and a boy carrying the soul of the hero, an incarnation of his hatred would follow. The people of Hyrule would never know peace. And who was this incarnation? Ganon. Every Zelda game that you experience is just the same curse playing out over and over and over again. A hero and goddess descendant are born, a version of Ganon appears, they fight, one side loses, and it happens over and over again. Wash, rinse, and repeat. So why do I think this curse has been broken? Well, Ganon's death in Tears of the Kingdom stood out to me amongst all of his other deaths, because it wasn't just him being sealed or purified by the Master Sword, it was him straight up dying, and there were two other factors at play, Draconification and the Sacred Stone. In one of my previous videos, I talked about how Draconification is arguably a fate worse than death. It is basically equivalent to throwing oneself away. Your very mind and soul become fractured and you are no longer yourself. And it's this very part that leads me to believe that the curse of Demise has been broken, as Ganon was killed in this fractured state along with his Sacred Stone at the same time. We still don't know everything there is to know about the Sacred Stone. Having your Sacred Stone destroyed could have grave consequences beyond what we are shown in this series. And it is these two factors that fuel my theory that Ganon can no longer reincarnate, as his soul has been destroyed beyond repair. For there to be reincarnation, the soul has to remain intact. And if the incarnation of Demise is no longer a threat, the spirit of the hero will no longer need to reincarnate itself to face it, essentially breaking the cycle since it wouldn't be repeating itself anymore. This state is further backed up by Breath of the Wild, because in the final fight, Zelda states that Ganon has pretty much given up on reincarnation. Is this a stretch? Am I reaching? Probably. In fact, Dan Nerdy Hylian, who is the commenter responsible for this entire video, had many counter-arguments to this theory. Like how it is implied that Ganon isn't the exclusive incarnation of Demise's hatred, and it can be argued that the likes of Malladus and Vati are incarnations as well. If this is correct, then it would completely destroy this theory, as it wouldn't matter if Ganon is gone forever, because Demise can just choose another incarnation and continue the cycle. And another argument that he made is that it's highly likely that only Link and Ganon reincarnate themselves, and each Zelda that you see is just a descendant of the previous one. And that would make sense, because they would still qualify, they would still have the blood of the goddess in them. Maybe less, but they would still be there. So as long as the Zelda descendant remains, the curse will continue uninterrupted. This point can also be argued against, because Demise's curse can also be interpreted as it requiring both the soul of the hero and the goddess descendant in order for it to activate. So even if there is a goddess descendant present, if there isn't a hero, then the hatred of Demise won't follow, thus breaking the curse. But if it isn't true and only one is needed to spawn in Demise's incarnation, then this sheds a really dark light on the royal family, because so long as they continue to exist and make more of themselves, there is bound to be more princesses carrying the blood of the goddess, and thus increasing the chance of Demise's curse taking effect. In fact, if Zelda and Link have a child after the events of Tears of the Kingdom, then this would only perpetuate the cycle, as there would be one more person with the blood of the goddess, and that would mean that they would inevitably create the problem that they just worked so hard to solve. But let's say my theory is correct and that there's no fault in it. Demise's curse has finally been broken, and there will be no more incarnations of Ganon in the future. This would only apply to Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom's branch of the timeline. Every other branch, the curse is still very much active, like the Age of Calamity's branch of the timeline, because their Ganon is still alive, sealed underground. So in a way, it's only partially been broken. And this leads me to another theory, that in order for Demise's curse to truly be broken, every branch of the timeline has to get rid of their own respective Demise incarnation. And until then, Demise will always win. Why was Ganon so strong? No, seriously, why was Ganon so strong in Tears of the Kingdom? I know he's supposed to be the final boss, but if you take a closer look, you'll realize that something doesn't add up. Let me explain. Tears of the Kingdom's Ganon is by far one of, if not the strongest iteration of Ganon in the whole Zelda franchise, from shattering the Master Sword, a weapon specifically designed to slay those like him, and summoning an entire army of monsters from pretty much thin air. But what was his source of strength? The Sacred Stone. But that's exactly what leads me to question his strength. Hear me out. Throughout the story of Tears of the Kingdom, many people are bestowed with the power of the Sacred Stone, from the champions to Ganon himself. Through careful observation, it's safe to say that receiving a Sacred Stone gives the user a substantial boost in power and allows them to channel and even amplifies their existing abilities. Zelda is a prime example of this, with her after receiving her Sacred Stone showing much more control over her time powers and generally seeming more combat capable than before. Same goes for the champions, who go from needing Link's help to face their respective bosses to being able to handle them alone at the end of the story. But Ganon's boosted strength was way more than anyone else's, to the point where not even 7 Sacred Stone users working together could beat him. Why was his growth so high? Was it his dark magic? That doesn't make any sense. Sure, he was probably more proficient at using his powers before receiving his Sacred Stone than any other champion, but this still doesn't explain his strength. Even if we give him the benefit of the doubt, Ganon should only be equivalent to 3 or 4 Sacred Stone users at once, not 7. And darkness is his element, sure, but it's no different from Riju's lightning or Sidon's water, so why don't we see them filling the sky with lightning bolts and flooding half of Hyrule? Well, I've got some theories. The first being Ganon's biology. As most of us already know, a Gerudo male is extremely rare. In fact, only one Gerudo male is born every 100 years or so. This individual is born with an immense amount of power and will inevitably become chief of the Gerudo tribe, and thus Ganon, by nature, was already at a much higher level than most creatures in Hyrule and would naturally have a higher capacity for magic. I speculate that the Sacred Stone boosts an individual to their max capacity, and once you reach it, the stone no longer boosts you. The other champions were most likely almost at their max capacity prior to receiving their Sacred Stones, and thus this would explain why there was such a minor boost in strength, at least in comparison to Ganon, because there was nothing left for the Sacred Stone to boost. But Ganon, due to his genetics and his adeptness at magic, would naturally have a higher capacity for growth. He was nowhere near his full potential, and thus his power grew far beyond anyone else's. My second theory for why Ganon was so strong is the way he obtained his Sacred Stone. As we know, Ganon's stone was not given to him, but rather he stole it from Sonia. But where am I going with this? Well, if you take a closer look, you'll realize that Sonia's power was still inside the Sacred Stone. It wasn't just a plain white Sacred Stone like all the others. Ganon's power didn't erase her power, but rather added itself on top of it, enhancing it, increasing the size of the Sacred Stone. So what you see isn't just Ganon's power, it's Ganon times Sonia. This would explain why Ganon's growth was so great, and why he was able to do so much with his darkness, as it wasn't just his power. But you could also argue about this point, because if it was Ganon plus Sonia's powers put together, then wouldn't Ganon have Sonia's power? Wouldn't he be able to reverse time and stuff like that? Well, I feel like it's more of a spiritual thing. Like, he doesn't have full access to her abilities, but rather the energy that it provides, and uses that to fuel his own darkness. We can even see an example of this when Rauru, Sonia, and Zelda team up to face him originally. Overall, Ganon's seemingly infinite power is definitely one of the more mysterious parts of Tears of the Kingdom. There are no clear answers as to why his growth was as drastic as it was. You could argue many things like he's strong because he's Ganon, or an incarnation of Demise, but these were my attempts to explain it. I would love to see yours. Hey, if you made it to this point in the video, thank you. It would really seem like you guys enjoy these theories that I make, and I enjoy making them as well. There's been something I've been thinking about doing for a while now. I've kind of wanted to play through every Zelda game from start to finish, because I've played most of them, but there are some that I haven't played, like Minish Cap and Ocarina of Time, and I kind of feel like a fake because I'm here making all these Zelda theories, and meanwhile I haven't played all the games. Of course, I've watched gameplay, playthroughs, of people playing these games, so I know the lore and everything like that to make these theories, but I feel like I'll have a new understanding of Zelda if I play the games personally, and I might be able to pick up on stuff I might have missed when I was younger. So I don't know if you guys have any suggestions. If you guys would like, I would like to do maybe some live streams where I play for an entire game in like a sitting or something like that. Maybe might make like a side Twitch channel if you guys don't want it to be on YouTube. But anyway, leave your comments down below if you think this idea is a good one. If it's a popular idea, then I'll do it. If it's not what you guys want, then I won't do it. So anyway, don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave your comments down below. Leave your own theories. You could be responsible for the next video, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.